Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me today is, as always, my partner in therapy, Ken Kelly. Hi, Ken.
Hey, it's great to be here. Great to be back with you, Rory. I'm just loving the episode 1 of the podcast. It's got some great comments. We've had loads of downloads in the hundreds and hundreds. So I'm really glad it's hitting the mark, and hopefully we can do the same for you today. And just to give you an overview of what we're going to be looking at today and why you should stay tuned in, we're going to be kicking off with looking at the wounded healer. And that's kind of when a client might bring material within a session that maybe parallels your own. It kind of might feel familiar to you, how you can work with that. Rory's going to be kicking off with the theory section, looking at the 7 stages of process. And of course, that is from the person-centered approach to counselling. And then we're going to be looking at the skill of reflection and how you can maybe look at that and work with that in your own placement or practice.
Certainly the podcast has gone down well. I got a text from someone in Carlisle, which is about 150 miles away from me, I think 100 miles maybe, and saying, one of my ex-students saying, "Oh, thanks for that, Rory. I was listening to it in my car." And that's the whole point of having podcasts. The videos are great, but podcasts are a lot more accessible. You can listen to them while you're doing a whole host of other things. But on to today's idea. And we're picking up really from some comments in the Facebook feed. So do join us in the Counselling Tutor Facebook feed. If you're listening and you've not visited, then just type in Counselling Tutor into the Facebook search and you'll find us. It's a closed group, so you'll have to apply to join, and we'll let you in, and you can meet a lot of like-minded people, a lot of people maybe training to be therapists, some who are qualified therapists, talking about the wonderful world of counselling and psychotherapy. So on today's topic, Ken, I want to talk a little bit about Chiron, or sometimes known as Chiron, the wounded healer.
And that is good. It's keying into a question that was asked in the Facebook group where somebody asked, they said, how do you deal with it when you're in a session with a client and the client starts bringing material and you're thinking to yourself, hey, this is my stuff they're bringing. This is my journey. That happened to me. That did. So that's kind of what kicks this off. But the wounded healer is an archetype, Rory. And you're going to tell us all what an archetype is. It's a big word.
Well, it is a big word, an archetype. So I think the best way to look at what an archetype is, if you think of a hero, so if you think of someone who's a hero, you might think of maybe a footballer like David Beckham. You might think of someone who's fought bravely in a war. You might think of someone who's just done something very heroic. They've jumped into a river to save someone. But what happens is we, as human beings, we have kind of totems or archetypes of people that we see as a hero. If I said to someone, give me a person who's a caring person, someone might say Mother Teresa.
Yep.
If for those of us in the UK, Lady Diana is held up as someone who's a caring person, the late Lady Diana Spencer. So archetypes are things that we look towards for people who do certain things. That's probably the best way of describing it. And one of the archetypes that comes up, certainly in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, and indeed in the medical profession, is the idea of the wounded healer. And it comes from Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, there was a centaur called Chiron or Chiron. It's actually spelled Chiron, but pronounced Chiron. So that's Greek mythology for you.
Yeah.
And what happened was he was a half man and a half horse, and he kind of went around the heavens hunting and doing the kind of things that gods in Greek mythology did. And one day he was actually accidentally shot by an arrow that was dipped in the blood of the Hydra, which was this head of a woman with many snakes coming out. And he was so badly hurt by it that he was in agony. But because he was immortal, he carried that pain through his entire immortality. And he spent his immortality looking for a cure. So why am I talking about a person of Greek mythology? Well, it links very much to a lot of people who take on the role of in the helping professions or in counselling in general. And can I tell you, a story, Ken, from my very first day when I trained a long time ago.
Tell us the story.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Just building up the dramatic bit of it.
I'll drum roll. Ladies and gentlemen, the story.
Yeah, we sat in a circle as most counselling students do, and our tutor said, what I want you to do is take a few minutes to reflect why you came to train as a counsellor. And bearing in mind, this is maybe the first or the second week. So, some of us knew each other from previous courses, but a lot of us were kind of strangers to each other. And we all sat with a piece of paper and thought and chewed our pens and wrote things down. And it was really interesting when we shared into the group that a majority of people who trained as counsellors had had therapy themselves.
Yeah.
That they'd had difficulties in their history and that they sought the help of someone, a counsellor, to really help them and really kind of get some sense of where they were going in their life.
And maybe you can relate to this. I know you're listening to this and maybe think to yourself, what is it that brought you into going into this, I guess, caring profession? And it was interesting because Carl Gustav Jung, also coined the phrase the wounded healer. And he's known for it and accredited to it. And he kind of looked at it. And I think that I saw somewhere some statistics that kind of, I think it's 73% of people that are drawn to counseling and psychotherapy have had their own battles that they have fought and maybe are now looking to put a hand into the darkness. And maybe that is you. So the tricky part there is when you're working with a client and the client potentially brings some material that you can really relate to. That something similar happened to you. What do you do in that kind of a situation? What happens inside you?
Absolutely. And this happens a lot. It's happened to me as a therapist where I've worked with a client and, I've been listening and being in the frame of reference of the client, trying to see the world from their perspective, being empathic. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I don't know whose feelings this is, that the client's talking about stuff that's gone on for them, but actually I've been through the same kind of difficulty and I'm not sure who I'm feeling it for. Am I feeling it for the client or am I feeling it for myself? And at that point, that can be pretty tricky. I know someone in the Facebook feed has said, what if you meet a client who's like you? And that can be very tricky. And there's a term for it, and it's called parallel process. In other words, your process, your kind of feelings and your journey through some difficulty is paralleled by the client going through maybe the identical process, a divorce, for instance. Someone may have gone through a divorce, you've seen the client talking about that, but also you've gone through a divorce, and all of a sudden you're thinking, I don't know whose stuff this is. Is it the client's stuff or is it my stuff?
And there's a danger in that as well. So you may be in that session and the client may bring something that you yourself went through, and potentially you made it through there and you had a certain route that you followed to get through there. You did certain things to get out of it. The danger is in trying to lead the client or guide them to take the route you did because it worked for you, because it's not your stuff, it's their stuff. And it's about respecting them to find their own way. So if I was to give you a hard example of that, there are people who get into recovery from drugs and alcohol. And they may potentially be drawn to go and work in recovery services, helping others that are struggling with addictions to kind of find their way out. Here's the truth. There's many ways or many routes out of being in active addiction. And I guess the wounded healer example may be trying to get someone to follow the route you took out of the addiction because it worked for you, where they could take a number of different routes and find their own way out. So it's about having that alarm bell go off in self, being mindful that when material parallels yours, when there is that parallel process and you're able to see that, to be really mindful of how you are in that relationship. And of course, take it to supervision. There's the biggie, take it to supervision.
Absolutely. And, when I read the post on the Facebook feed, one of the things that kind of struck me was I was just so pleased that the person had identified it. That's the key thing, because a lot of the stuff that gets us into trouble when we get kind of caught up in client stories or we can't separate our story from the client's is subconscious. So by the very fact this person had identified it means that it can be worked with. it can be worked with, and it can be worked with, as Ken said, in supervision. So you can go to the supervisor, and the supervisor will help you untangle your material from the clients. It can be worked through in your own therapy. And I think, and I'm not saying this is the case of the person who posted on the Facebook feed, but generally speaking, in my experience, if stuff hasn't been resolved for the therapist, it leaves them very vulnerable to parallel process. So if someone's going through a divorce or going through a bereavement, and it's not kind of completed that cycle of kind of understanding and acceptance, then it's liable to kind of open wounds up. The wounded healer, literally, open those wounds up within the therapist, and all of a sudden the therapist is catapulted not into the client's frame of reference, not trying to see the world from the client's point of view, but actually reflecting on what's going on for them. And at that point, the therapist is literally not present in the counselling relationship.
And this is why, certainly in the UK, it is highly encouraged by most of the awarding bodies that the student counsellor engage in their own therapy and to go and work through your own stuff. And if you're, the thing is, the BACP or the ethical framework kind of says it doesn't matter if you're a student or whether you're a qualified counsellor. If you need therapy, if something comes up for you, go and speak to your own counsellor. You know, there are certain things we will take to supervision. A good supervisor may say, you know what, that's some stuff you need to work through there. I suggest you go and see a counsellor. Go and do it. Go and take your stuff and look at it and work through it so that we can fully be there for the clients. But it is tricky. I've been in private practice for some time now, and just looking over my last week, I recognised one instance where the client was bringing material, and they were speaking about a person within their story, and I was getting angry. I was getting angry with the person they were talking about. And I was actually feeling the feeling of anger, which you get that kind of a knot and a burning, and I checked it and I kind of helicoptered and saw where I was within that, was able to put it one side and examine it after the client had left. And that was my anger, not theirs. It was me. I was getting angry because I had, I guess, experience in my life of somebody who had done something different, and I was angry at them. So I wasn't, for that split moment, I wasn't with the client. So it is tricky, and it is also okay. It's okay, because we're all human and we have got our own stuff. But recognize it, do something about it, take it to supervision, and if needed, go and do your own therapy.
Absolutely. And I love that phrase, helicoptering, which means that you're in the room facing the client, listening, but also a little part of you is kind of hovering above, looking at the whole interaction. It's one of those very difficult to explain experiences until it actually happens. And once it happens, you kind of get it. You're kind of in two places at once. You're very present with the client, but also part of you is seeing both of it. And also, I'm very big on protection in therapy. And protection goes two ways. It's about the client getting the best therapy so they're protected when they're sharing their story. But it's also about the therapist's protection. If a client's material is starting to fracture the therapist, if the client's leaving the therapy room and the therapist is kind of still within their own process with this parallel process, that is very, very emotionally dangerous for the therapist, because what can happen is that it might just compound and stop that process of people completing it. For our friends in the world of Gestalt, we would call it a Gestalt, a completion.
Yep.
And also, it means that if you've got stuff going on and your client's coming to see you and it's the same stuff the client's bringing, are you going to be really kind of pleased to see the client? You know, or is this going to have some kind of dread? Or, you know, the client's bringing divorce again and I'm going through a divorce. And sometimes the ethical thing to do here is to think, can I actually work with this client given the material? And you'd have to speak with your supervisor, you'd have to take a view. But some cases, you know, politely referring on, disengaging from client work is fine in the protection of both you and the client.
And I guess as we come to the end of this section, we're not here to give advice. We're not here to give you the answers. What we are here to do is to debate this and chat about it. Take this topic into your groups. Go and speak with your peers. Go and speak with fellow learners. speak about it on the Facebook, speak about your experiences, and hopefully just kind of acknowledging it, talking about it, seeing it will give some kind of movement for you.
Yeah, and I think, as we come to the end of this segment, in counselling, just talking about the stuff that's going on for you is quite powerful because it frees other people to talk about it, and it normalises it. In other words, that you think, I'm the only person in the world who's going through parallel process. You share it in your group with your training peers, and you might find that there's one or two go, well, actually, that happened to me.
So there you go, wounded healer. Something there for you to have a think about and maybe to process for yourself, maybe something for your journal if you keep one as well. And moving on from the wounded healer, where I guess in a way we've been kind of linking what's going on within us to our practice. And a man who is an expert of linking theory to practice is Rory. And today Rory's going to be speaking to us in depth about the 7 stages of process.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Welcome to Counselling Theory with Rory. And in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about the 7 stages of process, sometimes known as counselling as a process. And it was developed by Carl Rogers, who developed person-centred therapy. So before I go on to talk about the 7 stages of process, I'd like to talk about what you need to facilitate the 7 stages of process working, or that process becoming developed in clients. And you need to show the core conditions. So linking theory to practice, counselling processes and behavioural change only happens if clients feel that they're not judged, that they're listened to, and that the person who is their therapist is genuine. And sometimes we call that the core conditions. So the first point I get across is that without those core conditions, counselling processes and processes within clients really, really can't start to kick in and start to exist. So the 7 stages of process is a theory. That's the first thing. And Rogers' theory was that people move through 7 distinct ideas of the world. And as they move through these stages, they're more able to take ownership and to live life on life's terms. And by that I mean that sometimes life can be cruel, it can be unpredictable, and it can't sometimes not be fair. And clients, and in fact a lot of individuals, struggle with the idea of the unfairness of the world. And the 7 stages of process shows us how people move from a very fixed view of the world. It's everybody else's fault, it's not mine, to a view of the world that is more able to adapt and live life on life's terms. I think that's the phrase I'm going to use a lot in this podcast. I'm also going to give you a download of a handout. So if you're on the Counselling Tutor page, on Counselling Tutor, on the podcast page, if you go to the show notes, I've got a handout for you which explains the 7 stages of process in a little more detail. So on to the 7 stages. Stage 1 and stage 2, you're very unlikely to see clients present for therapy in stage 1 and stage 2. And I'll tell you why. In stage 1, clients are usually quite defensive and they're very resistant to change. So you might have clients saying, well, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. And I'm not going to change. And it's very difficult for people to kind of develop a change in their lives if they think it's not them that needs to change, it's everybody else. So stage 1, clients are defensive, resistance to change, and they kind of hang on to a lot of past experiences, and it's very difficult to get them in the here and now. Stage 2, again, unlikely according to Tony Merry in Learning and Being for clients to present. They become less rigid, but they're still talking of external events, and feelings tend to be unowned. So you say to someone, how does that feel? Someone in stage 2 may very well say, don't know, scary maybe, but no real connection with it. It's just a feeling pulled out of the air that they connect to it. Now in stage 3, this is more likely when clients are presenting for therapy, and they talk about the I a lot. They say, I feel, I think, I experience. And in stage 3, this is really where clients start in therapy and start that process of change. But they might describe themselves as an object rather than themselves. What does that look like in the therapy room? Well, it looks like a client saying, well, I'm stupid. I'm stupid. I'm fat. I'm not very good at this. I'm not very good at that. And when clients talk as themselves as an object, it's a rich area for clients to explore, for therapists to explore where they're getting that idea from. And usually when people come out with very, very object statements like that, it's usually because they're under conditions of worth. It's usually that someone's told them that consistently and they begin to introject it and believe it to be true. Introjected values and conditions of worth. And they also might talk about avoiding discussions of the present. So there might be a lot of avoidance in stage 3. They might talk about maybe the relationship and you might say, well, how does that feel to you? And they kind of avoid it. Oh, well, everybody has difficulties in the relationship, don't they? There's loads of people who struggle. That's the type of stage 3 presentation you might have with a client. In stage 4, clients may begin to build trust with the therapist, and this is the key thing here. Clients trusting the therapist are able to kind of look at the very difficult truths. So if you just take the client who's talked about relationships in stage 3, they may very well say, I really can't live with this person anymore. I really feel devalued by them. They call me names. I feel totally unloved. And as they trust the therapist is able to kind of hold that difficulty, help the client emotionally hold that difficulty. Well, it's explored. So a stage 4 client is someone who will be bringing really, really difficult material and trusting the therapist or the counsellor to work with it and to be very gentle. And sometimes you need to be very gentle in stage 4. Clients are really kind of talking about the stuff that maybe they've never talked about before. Now, as people move into stage 5, they start to make their own decision making. So if we keep on that theme of relationships, stage 5 client may come in and say, I've done it, I've left him, or that job, I hated my boss, I hand him a notice in, I'm going. And that is where people are making action. They're actually changing their lives. They're taking control of their lives, which is what person-centered therapy is about. It's a growth model about people taking ownership of the situation where they can and making changes. And it's interesting, in stage 5, clients sometimes sometimes it'll be the end of therapy. And in stage 5, it's not unusual for clients to miss appointments. And when challenged, it's like, well, I think maybe I've got enough, in which case therapy ends. And a lot of clients exit in stage 5 in the model. Stage 6 is an interesting one. For those who stay in therapy, they show real rapid growth towards being real incongruent about the situation. And they often develop unconditional positive regard for others, being very non-judgmental. And really at stage 6, it's the time where clients sometimes don't need formal counselling. So for those who stay on, they've got to the point where they can understand their own processes and they can understand the processes of others, and they can begin to live life on life's terms. And that's where counselling usually ends for those people who stay into stage 6. Seventh stage is an interesting one. I've never found anybody who can kind of explain what clients in the 7th stage look like. And that's because I think Roger's added it as a later stage. But I would put it in this aspect. I think people in stage 7 would probably look like Mother Teresa or Gandhi, in that they were very spiritual people, not really concerned with the mechanics of the world, but the process of how they're living in it and how they relate to other people, if that makes any sense at all. And all the people I've ever talked to who understand the model have kind of said, yeah, it's stage 7. I've never met anybody in stage 7. But yeah, for assignments, you could talk about Gandhi or Mother Teresa, or someone who's kind of become a bit global. Their process is universal. They're giving themselves to the world in a way. That's how I see the seventh stage. And they're not controlled at all by external forces. So the opinion of others isn't really controlling them. So that Gandhi and Mother Teresa would be a classic example where people are doing good things and they're using unconditional positive regard on a global scale. So why is it important that we have an understanding of the seven stages of the process, apart from kind of understanding where the client is? Well, one really great reason for having an understanding of the seven stages of the process, it gives us a common language with our supervisors. So if we go to see our supervisor, we're able to say, well, I think this client's in stage 5 and this is what's happening. Then it's almost certain that the supervisor will be able to better work with you and better be able to communicate how they think you're working with the client. One final thing on the 7 stages of process, it's not a linear pathway. So people may sometimes be stage 5 in one aspect of the life and stage 4 in the other. So what does that look like? Well, I've left my partner, but I've still not left my job. So that would be that kind of incongruence where someone's found the courage to leave their partner, but still hasn't found the right time or the right situation to leave their job. And Rogers did allude to the fact that those people who haven't reached stage 7 may well go down the scale. So that's where clients sometimes reappear for therapy. So I hope that's been useful. Don't forget to check the free handout on the show notes page on counsellingtutor.com. And I'll see you in the next theory segment.
That is just so nicely explained. Thank you so much for that, Rory. And I know that the 7 stages of process is purely a person-centered bit of theory, but I guess just hearing it, there's so much there that would apply to counselling, psychotherapy in general, and it's just really good to get that overview. So thank you so much. Really appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Ken. And I'm really interested in what skill you're going to be looking at in this podcast. Which one have you picked?
Counselling Skills with Ken Kelly.
Today I'd like to focus on the skill of reflection. And I often refer to this as the lost skill. And the reason that I use that term is from watching learners doing simulated skill sessions and kind of being with them in that journey, or maybe listening to recordings from placement where clients have agreed that those recordings could be evaluated. I seldom see the skill of reflection used, and I kind of wonder why that is for myself. And so today it's about focusing down on what reflection is and how powerful that can be in the client's journey. And I have a suggestion kind of right at the top here. If you're in a college or learning environment where you are doing simulated skill sessions, contract with the person that you're working with to record the session. You can use a smartphone. There's no need to bring in massive recording technology. And Carl Rogers was recording sessions really early on when, I guess, recording equipment had just been released. And he reflected that this was his greatest learning came from those recordings. And if you record your very own skills sessions and listen to them back and kind of evaluate yourself on those, because at the time of, I guess, doing the skill sessions, you're there with the client. So moving on, let's look at a definition of reflection. And I guess the definition is something that you might use if you were doing an assignment and you were asked to describe what reflection is and kind of what place that has in the therapeutic relationship. So really what reflection is almost like holding up a mirror. And I guess that's why it is used, the word reflection. What you look at in the mirror is exactly what you see in the mirror is exactly what goes in the first place. It is a direct reflection. It is the same. So repeating the client's words back to them exactly as they said them. That is what a reflection is in its simplest term. So looking at that a little bit deeper, it's not necessary that you might reflect back the whole sentence. There are times when you might, but it may be that you take a select few words from the sentence, or a reflection can even be one word that the client has brought. When we reflect back like that mirror, we're looking to reflect the tone, the feeling of the words. So the narrative, we're now reflecting that back, but we might match the client's tone. We might match the client's maybe a facial expression they pulled while saying those words, or maybe they hunched their shoulders up when they said, I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. We might reflect that back by hunching our own shoulders, mirroring that body language as well and saying, I felt so scared, I didn't know what to do. So there is ways of how we can define what a reflection is. But why? Why would we use reflection? Is it an effective skill? What does it do within the therapeutic relationship? Well, first of all, and I guess really importantly, and so easy to overlook, is the client feels heard. It's their words that they're bringing over. It's their agenda, and we're only reflecting back the words that they brought. We're not putting our agenda in there at all. That is true unconditional positive regard, respect for the client to set the pace of their journey. And they feel heard, which builds the rapport, and rapport deepens trust within our relationship with the client. Interestingly, the client may actually hear the words as if for the very first time. So think of this, the client's got the material, the narrative, the going around in their head. They share that with you in a session. You reflect that back, and it's a different direction. When the narrative is going around in their head, it's almost going in a circular motion. As soon as they put that out, it changes direction. It's no longer circular within them. It is now out, so it's linear. It is coming out within the therapeutic relationship. You taking that and almost hitting it back, almost like a tennis ball, and the tennis ball that is coming back is their very own words. Interestingly, can sometimes be quite surprising to the client. It's almost like the client is seeing this for the very first time. This allows the client to process and sometimes even clarify their very own words. So let me give you an example of that. The client may be struggling with a relationship issue and may bring a narrative along the lines of, I'm really struggling to get on with him in the relationship. He's always bringing me down. It may well be that the reflection is, he's always bringing me down. There may be a slight pause as the client hears their very own words back. And it may be that they look quizzically and say, no, he's not really. He's not always bringing me down. We do have our good times. And then carry on with the narrative. So it's interesting that they can hear their very own words back and almost kind of change them and look at them as if they're hearing them for the first time, and maybe be able to process that and clarify for themselves. Moving on to the next one, we can say that reflection can be used to focus down, to almost cut through the narrative and drill right down to the feelings. And what I mean by this is, you may have seen this specifically if you're in placement, you most probably will have seen this. If you're in practice, you will definitely have seen this. And you may even have seen this in your simulated skill sessions when rapport has been built and there is a trusting relationship. When a client is bringing heavy material, painful material, it is often really difficult for them to go down to the feelings. So the story is told, and every now and again they'll dip down and touch on those feelings. And it's almost like I touch on the feelings as the client, I feel that pain, and I quickly run away from those feelings back into the story, into the safety of the narrative. And what we're able to do with reflection, if we're listening to the feelings beneath the words, as Rogers kind of put it, it's almost listening to the music below the words. We're listening for those feelings. We're in touch. We are in that empathic bond with the client, walking with them as if as if it was our world, seeing it as they see it, and we see and we feel those feeling words, we can reflect those back. Just those little few words that they said that touch on the feelings. So an example of that may be, I'm trying as hard as I can, but it's really killing me. But I go into work and I try and be strong and I just carry on. And we can reflect back and say, it's really killing me. And it kind of invites the client, if they choose to take up that invitation, to go back and look at that, because that is the feeling. That is the meat of what they are bringing. The rest is the narrative that is wrapped around that. And if you use that in a relationship where rapport is built, where the empathy levels are deep, you may find that the client takes that invitation and goes back and says, yes, it is. I just feel that I can't go on anymore. I'm so devastated. I feel so much pain. And they're then there, out of the narrative, but really in the emotions of what it is that they're bringing. Another use for reflection is to use it as a skill for focusing. So if a client is bringing a lot of material, you might reflect a certain part of that back to focus on it, or to at least invite the client again to kind of visit that part of the material that they are bringing. They may choose to take that, they may choose not to take that. That, I guess, is their choice and it's irrelevant, but we can invite. We can use reflection as a counselor, and we can use it to clarify our understanding. We can almost use reflection as a question. So I'll give you an example of that. The client says something along the lines of, my husband and my father are fighting. I'm really angry with him. We might reflect back the word him with a quizzical look. In order for me to be in the client's frame of reference, when she says, or he says, I'm really angry with him, I need to know, is that the father? Is that the husband? So that I can be in their frame of reference. And that can be done by using a reflection. I'm really angry with him. Him? Yeah, my dad. He really gets to me when he's non-accepting. So you can get a clarification for you to be able to adjust where you are to make sure that that empathic bond is strong and you truly are within that client's frame of reference. So I thought it would be interesting now to drop in a simulated skills session where reflection is used. So let's listen to the simulated skills and then we'll kind of come back and sum up.
When I sort of reflect and look over that kind of setting, is so often I would sacrifice my own wants and my own desire, or my own, if there was nobody else involved in the situation, what I would choose to do would be very, very different from what I actually end up doing.
Sacrifice my own wants.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it really feels like putting that what I would do for my own, out of my own will or my own free choice, I would put that aside and favor what would be the accepted, or in my perception, what I think someone else would rather I do. Or
just having a listen over that example where reflection was used to, I guess, reflect the feeling that I felt was underlying what the client was bringing. It was interesting that the reflection caused a moment of silence for the client. The client almost went in and was mindfully looking at that, going back. And if you listen to how the narrative then continues, the narrative continues in a very feeling way where the client has taken that invite and has decided to go and explore deeper the feelings that underlie what she was feeling in that moment. So let's move on and let's look at a different use of reflection from the same session.
The thought of doing or maybe expressing my wants and what I would like to do, and that feels very selfish. For some reason it feels like, but why put my own wants and needs in front of what someone else may choose?
Why put my own wants and needs in front of what somebody else would choose?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what they choose, so the only thing I can do is, I guess, ask, but also look after myself.
In the second example, the reflection was a question. It was a question that came up in the narrative that the client was bringing, the why put my own wants and needs in front of somebody else's. And in hearing that back, in that tennis ball kind of returning to this client in this simulated skills session, the client is kind of almost hearing that for the first time differently. And that is evident by the pause that is there while the client almost considers this question. It's a question that was kind of just would have easily passed by in conversation, but when reflected back, prompted the client to kind of look at that, to be reflective, I guess, from the reflection. And then the client actually answers that. She's answering it for herself. And it's almost as if there's been a small moment of movement that can be heard in the answering of that question. So there you have it. There they are, the skill of reflection, a skill that I suggest that you go and take and use in your simulated skills sessions within your learning environment, that if you are in placement, you take in and use within your skills sessions. And if you do have the ability to record your sessions, record and listen and hear the power of reflection. Let's try to together make reflection not the lost skill that is seldom heard, but a powerful skill that enables our clients to, I guess, move on, to process and to become more fully functioning people. I hope that was useful.
Well, again, Ken's explained a skill, how it's applied, how it's used, and I love listening to Ken talking about skills. In fact, Ken used to teach the skills when he taught with me. It was his speciality, and it really does show. So over to you, Ken.
Well, it kind of brings us neatly, I guess, to the end of today's episode. I really do hope that you've got something out of it and that you've enjoyed it. And if you have, I want to ask you a favor. I'd really like to ask you to do something for us. Pop over to iTunes and leave a review for the podcast. It's not difficult to do. You just go to iTunes, find the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and it's pretty step by step. You just click on leave a review, and you can put some comments of what you think. And the reason that I'd like to ask you to do that is because iTunes works on a system of the more reviews you have, the more value they put on your podcast, and the higher up in the podcast feed the podcast comes. So by you leaving a review, what it does is it kind of lifts our podcast, and it's going to get seen by more learners, more students, just like you, all over the world. So it's a way of spreading the word. And also, we just kind of really love to hear what you think of it. Leave an honest review. Be congruent and tell us what you think of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
And don't forget to put into the Facebook feed, that's Counselling Tutor, search Counselling Tutor on Facebook, and it's a closed group. You just click to join and we let you in. Put in what you want to hear. Tell us what you want in these podcasts and we'll do our best to accommodate you.
And taking that one step further, we got a brand new feature that we are starting as from next week's podcast, and it's called Ask Rory and Ken. Now, what it is within the Facebook group, ask a question. If you've got a question to ask, look for the little post that says Ask Rory and Ken. Ask your question there, and we're going to pick out some questions, and we're going to be answering them right here on the podcast. If you're struggling with anything doesn't make sense, or you just kind of want to get clarification on something, hey, ask Rory and Ken on the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Oh yeah, and if we can't answer it, we know people who can.
Oh, yeah.
So we may very well be getting other guests on to help us out in that.
Certainly. And of course, we wouldn't leave without asking you to visit our mother website, as it were. It's kind of our home. It's www.counsellingtutor.com. It's really worth visiting. You'll get all the podcasts there, but you'll also get the show notes. You know, we make notes of these episodes. So if you want to get notes on today, on the 7 stages of process, on the skill deal of reflection, or of course look at the Wounded Healer and that parallel process where you can get all those notes right there on our website. So until next time, thank you so much for listening and spending your time with us here today.
See you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.